Her injuries were so brutal that people said she resembled Miss Pac-Man. 32-year-old Alejandra Ico Chubb was a mother of 3 from Guatemala. She was in a relationship with 42-year-old Mario Ical, but behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. On October 29th of 2018, Mario had came home filled with jealousy. He had learned that Alejandra wasn't being truthful about seeing her sister, and instead of confronting her, he completely lost control. He grabbed a machete and stormed into the bedroom where Alejandra was resting. In a fit of rage, he struck with full force, severing her hands and leaving a horrific wound across her face from ear to ear. The violence was so extreme that later on people would compare her face wounds to the arcade character Miss Pac-Man. To make matters even worse, Alejandra was alive for the entire thing, her children were watching, and Mario was recording it all. Mario fled the scene, and since neighbors could hear screaming coming from their home, they waited for him to leave and then they went to go check on Alejandra. When they went to go check on her, she was barely alive, and once help arrived, it was already too late. 2 days later, Mario was captured, and when he was questioned, he admitted to everything and claimed that jealousy was his motive. In August of 2023, nearly 5 years later after Alejandra's unaliving, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison for femicide.
You really expected to believe that she stabbed herself 10 times in the back of the neck and cops said, yep, that's her name is Ellen, she's 27, and that night her fiance Sam said that he left Ellen alone in that apartment and went to the gym for 30 minutes. But when he came back, the door was locked from the inside. Not just closed, it was locked with one of those swing bar latches that only unlocks from the inside. He said he was banging on the door, he was texting her, but there was no answer. So he breaks down the door and finds Ellen slumped on the kitchen floor with a 10-inch knife plunged into her chest covered in blood. Sam calls 911 screaming that his fiance stabbed herself. And you'd think that the police would hear that and go, let's investigate. No, they took one look at that locked door and assumed that she unalived herself. And that was that. Case closed. No crime scene, no investigation. They cleaned the apartment within hours and they literally bleached that evidence out of existence. But here's the part that makes it so insane. She didn't have just one wound. She had 20. 10 to the back of her neck and head, 8 deep ones to her chest. One literally broke her skull and severed her spinal cord. Doctors said that she would have been paralyzed after that. Like, there's no way that she could have kept on stabbing herself. But the cops, they still called it a They said that there was no DNA except for hers. So they took Sam's word that the door was locked and that the only way to go in or out was the locked door or the 6th floor balcony, so it had to be her. Case closed. She also had bruises that were in different stages of healing, like not from that night but from before, meaning that someone had been hurting her for days. So let me ask you this, does that sound like someone who unalived themselves or a that was covered up?
She was found nailed inside of a wall. 28-year-old Renia Lewis was from Berkeley, California. Her family described her as vibrant, family-oriented, and someone who loved to cook. When she went missing in late September, they knew that something was wrong. On Friday, September 28, 2025, Renia was last seen in Vallejo, California around 10 p.m. On Sunday, September 28th, her family hadn't heard from her for a couple of days, so they reported her as missing. The California Highway Patrol issued an ebony alert stating that she was last seen Friday night, and news of her disappearance spread very fast on social media. Renia's loved ones searched using a phone tracking app, and it led them to a Vallejo neighborhood where they found her phone tossed on top of a school roof. Police also believe that she was inside of a house on 14th Street because of a nearby Safeway security footage and her phone's location data. Investigators searched inside of that home but said they couldn't find any sign of Renia at that time. On September 30th, investigators got a search warrant and searched the house for a second time, but this time they were looking at the outbuilding in the back of the house. That's when they found a concealed entry leading to an attic, and inside, Renia's dismembered remains were hidden behind a wall. 41-year-old Douglas Irwin Shaw, who was an employee at Six Flags in Vallejo, was arrested at his job. Police say he confessed, although no motive has been made public. Renia's family claims that they were not in a relationship and they had probably just met. This case is still ongoing, so once we have more information, I can make a part 2 to this video. Sending many prayers to Renia's family during this time.
In July of 2007, this entire family, who was part of a doomsday cult, mysteriously disappeared. Let's talk about it. So this is Simon Cadwell, his partner Chantel McDougall, their 5-year-old daughter Leela, and their friend Antonio Popic. Simon was an internet doomsday cult leader who published books about his beliefs, and he created a website called The Truth Fellowship. He had a pretty large following too. They all lived in a house on a remote property in a small town in Western Australia called Nanab. They disappeared in the summer of 2007 after telling friends and family that they were moving to Brazil to join a spiritual community because they felt that they didn't belong in modern society. But in the months leading up to their disappearance, Simon told a woman in his online cult forum that he was planning a peaceful family suicide pact, and after, Antonio would bury their bodies in and bushes before killing himself in the wilderness so no one would find his body either. When the woman questioned why he would be okay with killing his young daughter, Simon backtracked and said that they would just move to an isolated area where no one could ever reach them. Those who knew Simon said he was strange and controlling and at the time was on antipsychotic medication. Those same people also said that Chantel and Antonio were brainwashed by him and would do anything he said. The beginning of this strange mystery starts in May of 2007 when Simon was pulled over while driving. Someone had tipped off the police stating that Simon wasn't who he said he was, and when police looked into this, they discovered that he had stolen a birth certificate from a former coworker and had stolen his identity. In all reality, Simon's real name was Gary Felton, and he had fooled everyone for the longest time. So during that traffic stop, police were questioning his driver's license, which made Simon panic. 2 months later, the entire family would vanish. Right before their disappearance, Simon and Chantel sold their cars for somewhat cheap, and Chantel cashed the check for that at the bank on July 13th. The next day, which was their last known sighting, Chantel met with a woman to sell her 2 of the family's pet dogs. The woman who bought the dogs was originally supposed to meet up with Chantel the next day, but when she called Chantel, Chantel said, quote, "No, you must come today." The woman said that Chantel appeared super anxious and that the entire encounter made her feel so uncomfortable. A few days later, their landlord went to their Nannup house, and it was an eerie scene. The house was spotless, and all of their personal belongings were gone. The only thing left behind was half a bowl of rice and 2 notes, one from Antonio and one from Chantel, who said that the entire family moved to Brazil. They were reported missing sometime later, and what police found during their investigation only brings more questions. Just 2 days before they disappeared, a call was made from their Nannup home to Transwa, which is a public transportation company in Australia. Whoever called booked a bus ticket from Bridgetown to Northcliffe under the name of J. Roberts, but it was never used. But 2 tickets under that same name were used the morning of July 16th, one going from Perth to Kalgoorlie and one from Perth to Northcliffe. A passenger under the name of J. Roberts did get off at Northcliffe, and someone did board a train to Kalgoorlie, but there's no evidence of anything after this. The day before, Antonio's phone traced to Perth, and it was used to call a Domino's Pizza and a hotel. His driver's license was also used to check into a hostel in Northbridge. This was confirmed to be him, as the Domino's driver confirmed Antonio was the guy he delivered the pizza to that night. As the other 2 tickets were being used the morning of the 16th, Antonio called Transwa for reasons unknown, and then he too vanished off the face of the earth. The investigation wasn't handled properly and lots of things slipped under the rug, like how a woman's shirt that possibly belonged to Chantel was found in a field in Northcliffe 3 months after she disappeared. The person who found it said it smelled like rotting flesh. This lead wasn't investigated until 2015, 8 years later, and at this point, a wildfire had come through and burnt everything up. In 2011, a Gary Felton checked into a caravan park in King River, which is near Albany. Authorities hunted down every Gary Felton in the country, but nothing ever came of it. Chantel's family is currently trying to raise funds to launch a new investigation to find them. They've even created a GoFundMe to help. At this point, her family believes that Chantel and Leela are likely dead and buried somewhere in Western Australia. This case has left me with so many questions. Did the entire family move to Brazil like they said? Are they living off-grid under different names? Did they take their own lives, or were they possibly murdered? So many questions remain unanswered. Their bank accounts have not been touched since the day they disappeared. Whatever happened to this family remains a mystery 17 years later.
This 25-stone woman sat on her foster son and killed him. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the homicide of Dakota Stevens. 10-year-old Dakota Levi Stevens had a very troubled start to his life. Because of this, he was taken away from his biological family and was placed into foster care, where for the next couple of years, he would jump from foster home to foster home to foster home. By April 2024, he was living with 48-year-old Jennifer Lee Wilson, an experienced foster mother who, at the time that she took Dakota in, already had 3 other children who were either fostered or adopted living in her home. On the 25th of April 2024, Dakota would escape from Jennifer's house and raced over to a neighbour's where he began braying on their door. When the neighbour opened the door, they saw Dakota, who was incredibly upset. He told this neighbour that his new parents had been hitting him and that Jennifer wasn't allowing him to ring his social worker. Dakota desperately pleaded with this neighbour, asking if they would adopt him. Only moments later, he would be dragged back to Jennifer's house, but he did not want to go inside. Dakota fought against Jennifer, resisting and tried to break free of her grasp and run away again. But this is when Jennifer got him on the floor and sat on him in order to restrain him, sitting on his midsection to be exact. From underneath her, Dakota tried to wriggle free and he called out to Jennifer, asking her to get off him, but she ignored him. After about 5 minutes of this, Dakota became still and silent. Jennifer, who was still sat on top of him, looked down to the 10-year-old and asked him if he was putting this on. When he didn't respond, she got off him, turned him over, so he must have been laying on his front. And that is when she discovered that he wasn't breathing and he had become pale in colour. Quickly, 911 was called, and when police arrived, they would discover that Dakota still wasn't breathing and they couldn't find a pulse. He would be airlifted to the hospital where he was put on life support. However, this wasn't enough. 10-year-old Dakota Levi Stevens would die in the hospital, and his cause of death was determined to be from mechanical asphyxiation. This being from Jennifer sitting on him, blocking his airways, forcing him to suffocate to death. 48-year-old Jennifer Lee Wilson would be arrested a couple of weeks later and charged with reckless homicide. She would go on to plead guilty for this and received a sentence of 6 years imprisonment. 6 years for sitting on her foster son and killing him. Comment down below and let me know what you think about this sentence. Does 6 years sound about right to you?
He disemboweled his girlfriend and told police that she was a human blow-up doll. 32-year-old Jerome Wright lived with his mother Della in her home in Miami, Florida. He seemed to have had a normal childhood. He played basketball in elementary school and had dreams of becoming a gourmet chef one day. Once Jerome had turned 14, Della noticed something different with him. One night, Jerome started to holler and scream uncontrollably with no clear reason. Della, who worked as a private security guard, brought Jerome with her to work so that she could keep an eye on him, but then decided she was going to drive him to Citrus Health Clinic for help. On the way, Jerome attempted to grab the steering wheel away from her, and nearby witnesses called 911. This marked his long struggle with mental illness, later identified as schizophrenia, and this would escalate with the years to come. On October 27th of 2017, Della called police reporting a strange smell coming from her home. She told the dispatcher that she had taken the kitchen trash out, but the smell continued to linger. Once officers arrived at their Northwest home, she told them that she hadn't seen her son's girlfriend since October 24th after she had entered her son's room. Officers entered Jerome's bedroom and they found bodily fluid and blood on a trash can and a mattress. As they continued with their search, they found the body of Jerome's girlfriend wrapped in sheets and clothes in a closet. Jerome's girlfriend, Deanna Clendenin, had been disemboweled. Della didn't know that Jerome had been disposing Deanna's organs in the trash can, which caused that horrible smell, and for some reason, she never thought to look in those trash bags to see what could have caused that smell. Della went on to tell police that the last time that she had seen Deanna was when Jerome had ran out of his room complaining of stomach pain. She could smell a foul odor in his bedroom, and he stated it was because there was a rat in his bedroom, he had diarrhea, and the dog pooped on the floor. When officers spoke to Jerome, he stated that whatever was in his room was not real and that he had a life-size blow-up doll made from flesh. He told authorities he hadn't seen Deanna in 5 months and they were no longer in a relationship. Police searched the back of the home, and that's when they found Deanna's missing organs in the trash cans. Her body showed multiple lacerations across her abdomen and several of her organs had been removed. Della went on to tell police that Jerome had been living with schizophrenia and he had been involuntarily taken into custody for a mental health examination, but nothing seemed to help him. Jerome, who was on probation, was arrested for abusing a dead body, and it's unclear on how long he will be in jail.
Did this man kill his entire family because the haunted house he was living in made him do it? There's two families we're going to be talking about today, the Defoe family and the Lutz family, but we're going to start with the Defoes. On November 13th, 1974, their oldest son, 23-year-old Ronnie, ran into his local bar that was just down the street from his family's home, frantically screaming that he found both of his parents shot dead in the house. Tragically, it was not only Ronnie's parents that had been shot, his entire family was found dead in his home. His father, Ronald Sr., his mother, Louise, and then all four of his younger siblings, 18-year-old Dawn, 13-year-old Allison, 12-year-old Mark, and 9-year-old John, were all found lying face down in their beds and had all been shot. It appeared that they had all been shot in their sleep and that none of them woke up despite all of these loud shot noises, and that there was no sign of a struggle. And the very next day, Ronnie Defoe confessed to killing his entire family. He claims that he woke up randomly at 3:15 in the morning and that he had been hearing voices either plotting against him or telling him to hurt his family, and that once he started, he just couldn't stop, and that it all happened very fast. Apparently, Ronnie wasn't the only family member that had been experiencing something like this. Only 6 months before he was killed, the father, Ronald Sr., hired a priest to come to the home that specialized in exorcisms because he had a devil on his back. That's a direct quote. During Ronnie's trial, both him and his lawyer claimed that Ronnie had been driven mad by evil presences in the home and pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but the jury did not buy the devil made me do it plea, and he was found guilty and sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. And his former home on 112 Ocean Ave in Amityville, New York sat empty for over a year, actually 13 months to be exact, until the Lutz family moved in. George and Kathy Lutz and Kathy's 3 children all moved into the home in December 1975, and only 28 days later after moving in, they fled the home, never to return again, not even to get their belongings. George and Kathy were aware of the brutal crime that had been committed in the home when they bought it, but it was being insanely discounted, and also they really weren't the superstitious types. But a family friend was able to convince the Lutz family to have a priest come and bless the home because of that terrible crime that had been committed only a year earlier. Reportedly, the priest sensed a sinister presence in one of the upstairs bedrooms and warned the family to not allow anyone to sleep in that room. And the Lutz family almost immediately started to experience some really odd things after moving into the house. Just to tell you guys a few of these experiences, there would be terrible smells in the home with no explanation where the smells are coming from. Doors would slam shut. The glass of the windows would just smash. Swarms of flies would appear. Swarms of flies and different insects would appear in the home with no explanation, even though it was the dead of winter. The daughter befriended a spirit named Jody, and all the children began to sleep face down in their stomachs, which they had never done before, and this was the way that all of the Defoe family were found in their beds the day that they were killed. And all of the family members' personalities began to change almost immediately after moving into the home, but what was ever affecting the family was mainly targeting the father, George. He became incredibly aggressive. He would obsessively sit in front of the fireplace for hours because he was constantly cold. And George also says that he would randomly wake up at 3:15 in the morning every single night, the exact same time that Ronnie Defoe woke up to kill his entire family. And after only living in the house for 28 days, so less than a standard month, the Lutz family fled the home, never to return again, not even to get their belongings, including their brand new boat that they had just bought, and also George's custom motorcycles, which were apparently his prized possessions. And George and Kathy Lutz refused to ever speak about what happened that final night that they had in the house that forced them to flee, because it was just too scary to talk about. Many have speculated that whatever drove Ronnie Defoe to kill his entire family possessed George, and that's why they fled the home. This story quickly got a lot of attention, and a group of psychic researchers and paranormal investigators spent a lot of time in the home doing like a paranormal investigation, like immediately after the Lutz family left, including probably the 2 most famous paranormal investigators of all time, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Everyone on the research team has their own story about all the terrifying experiences that they had in the home, but all of them agreed that there was something evil in that home that had been there for a long time, even longer than before the Defoes had been killed in the home. And probably the most interesting thing that came from this investigation came from a camera that was set up to take a photo every 5 minutes. The camera was set up to take a photo of like the doorways where all the bedrooms were, where the Defoe family had been killed in their sleep. And one photo is particularly interesting. Out of 100 something photos, there's this one photo that appears to show a little boy hiding in the doorway. Extremely terrifying, and and every member of that research team swore up and down that no children were brought along for this paranormal investigation. So this is a mystery who this little boy is. A lot of people think it resembles the youngest member of the Defoe family, 9-year-old John. Many successful books and upwards of 20 movies were all made about the Amityville horror, all marketing them as being based on a true story. This house is probably the most famous haunted house of all time, but what if I told you it might have all been a hoax? For one thing, many people have lived in the house after the Lutz family fled the home, and none of them have ever reported a single thing of paranormal activity. Also, parts of the home that the Lutz family claimed were destroyed by ghosts were perfectly intact when they moved in. Also, some parts of their story turned out to be proven just plain false and made up. Like they claimed on New Year's Day, they went outside to see hoof marks that had been made by a demon in the snow. Turns out there was no snow on the ground on that day in Amityville, New York. Also, years later, Ronnie Defoe's lawyer, William Weber, came out and said that the entire thing was a hoax, and he brainstormed the entire thing with the Lutz family because William Weber was planning on writing a book about it. In the Lutz's family defense, though, William Weber only ever met with the Lutz family after they already fled the home after living in it for 28 days, so it's not like this was planned beforehand. Also, William Weber only met up with the Lutz family because he wanted to write a book, but he planned to give some of the profits from the book to his client, Ronnie Defoe, that killed his entire family, and the Lutzes were not okay with that, so they actually ended up selling their story to a different author, and his book became incredibly successful. It sold millions of copies. They made a movie about it that had many sequels and also many spin-offs, so it's really possible that maybe William Weber only came out and said that the entire thing was a hoax because he was a little salty. George and Kathy Lutz even both passed polygraph tests. I know that's like not the biggest piece of evidence, but that matters to you. They also never changed their stories up until the day they died, other than admitting that some things were exaggerated for the book and the movie. But also, Ronnie Defoe, the man who killed his entire family in the Amityville house, has changed his story countless amounts of times about what happened that night and why it happened and who was involved, all the way up until the day he died just a couple years ago. I'm super interested to get your guys' take on this story today. I cannot wait to read the comments on this one. Do you think that this is truly a haunted house with an evil force that targets families? Or do you think that this is one of the most successful hoaxes of all time? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. And while you're there, please let me know what case you'd want me to cover next. I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
Did you guys hear about those two moms who drove their 6 adopted kids off of a cliff? Jennifer and Sarah Hart were secretly starving, abusing, and straight up torturing their kids. On the outside, they looked like the perfect family, but one day, 6-year-old Abigail shows up to school covered in bruises. She tells her teacher that her mom dunked her head underwater and punched her with a closed fist. She had what she called owies on her back and stomach, and you will not believe why. They accused her of stealing a penny, a freaking penny. The teacher reported it immediately, thank God, but for whatever reason, Sarah took all the blame herself and only got 1 year of probation. But that only made everything so much worse for the kids. Immediately after Sarah's probation, they pulled all 6 kids out of school and they said that they were going to be homeschooled. No more teachers, no one to see what was happening. That's so convenient, right? Then one night, 15-year-old Hannah, she jumps out of the 2nd floor window and runs to her neighbor's house begging for help. She told them, please don't make us go back. They're racist. They abuse us. But the next day, Jen and Sarah had the nerve to tell the neighbors that she was lying, that she had mental issues and a rough childhood, but the neighbors were not stupid. They'd seen those children begging for food multiple times, so they called CPS. CPS show up and they knock on the door, but surprise, there's no answer. And then 3 days later, they found their SUV smashed at the bottom of a cliff. Jennifer and Sarah, dead. 4 of the kids, dead. Marcus, Abigail, Jennifer, and Sierra thrown out of the car like rag dolls. And it gets even worse. Devontae and Hannah, their bodies were never found, even after police scoured that whole mountain. At first, police thought that it must have been an accident, but when they looked, there were no skid marks on the road at all. Which means that Jen, who was driving 90 miles per hour, by the way, never even tried to stop. She literally floored it right off the edge. And on top of that, some of the kids had substances in their bloodstream that made them drowsy. So this was 100% intentional. And it turns out that Jen and Sarah only adopted those poor children for money that they'd get from the government. They were cashing those checks while abusing them. I literally cannot imagine the suffering they went through.
He held her captive for 12 days because she refused to go on a date with him. What do you mean? Because I'm sorry, what do you actually mean? Jeffrey Allen Maxwell from Fort Worth, Texas, weird man. He was never normal. When he was young, as a teenager, but I think also as a child as well, he used to break into people's houses in his neighborhood for the sole purpose of stealing women's dirty. When he was 18 years old, he met and married a woman named Rita. The two of them had a child together, but later divorced when Jeffrey was 29 years old. And it was in 1981 when he met another 29-year-old, a woman named Martha Martinez. Martha was from Mexico. The two of them met through a postal matching service, so they were long distance because they met when Martha was still living in Mexico. Jeffrey was in the States, and the two of them would write love letters to each other until Jeffrey eventually proposed. Martha's family, not a fan of Jeffrey because he was just a weird guy. He gave off a weird feeling. There was something so off about him. They couldn't put their finger on it, but they didn't like him. But that didn't matter to Martha. She genuinely thought that she was in love with this guy, so she left her entire life behind in Mexico and went to go live with Jeffrey in Texas. Their relationship progressed, of course, and it got physical. And slowly but surely, Martha began finding out what Jeffrey was really like. And Jeffrey, his preferences, techniques, fetishes in the bedroom, they made Martha so uncomfortable because he had a thing for aggression in the bedroom, okay? He always wanted handcuffs and whips and ropes and chains, and Martha was like, this isn't really my thing, but sure, I guess, if you like it, I guess. But then the line of it becoming too much, too weird, and too scary for Martha, that line was crossed. And it turned into full-blown SA, and it left Martha not only with injuries and bruises all over her body, but also in fear of her own husband because he made it clear that he didn't care about her. He didn't care if she did or didn't want to do what he wanted to do. He didn't care if it made her uncomfortable. He did what he wanted when he wanted to. And it got to a point where Jeffrey started to leave Martha locked away in a dark room by herself for days. He truly treated her like she was nothing but a piece of trash. He was awful to her. Mother's Day in May of 1992 was the last time that Martha's family ever heard from her. By this point, she and Jeffrey had been living in Texas and married for 11 years. They also now had a child together. And in May of 1992, Martha's family in Mexico got a letter from her informing them that she was leaving Jeffrey, and immediately her family was concerned because the letter did not sound like Martha. It just wasn't something that she would write. It was also weird that she would be writing them a letter instead of calling. The letter was also written in English, and Martha spoke to her family in Spanish, so it wasn't checking out. As soon as they read that letter, her family members thought that the letter was either forged or that she was forced to write it. So because they couldn't get a hold of her and her family members were growing so concerned about her, one of them ended up calling Jeffrey asking where she was. And he answered the call, but then he almost immediately hung up. Concerning. Martha's brother was so worried about her, so concerned that she could possibly be in danger, that he got on a flight to Texas immediately, and once he was there, he reported her a missing person. Police began an investigation into looking for Martha, but they could not find anything. They had nothing to indicate what happened to Martha or where she could be. And of course, it was Jeffrey's story that she simply left him, that she got up and walked away, but for some reason left her purse, her passport, all of her credit cards, and most important of all, her young son, their son. 3 years passed with no answers as to what happened to Martha or where she could be, and in 1995, Jeffrey filed for divorce. He stated that he didn't know Martha's whereabouts and he hadn't seen her since 1992. And Jeffrey Maxwell was the one and only suspect in relation to Martha's disappearance, and there is a very good reason as to why. Not only because Martha's family hated him and knew that there was something off about him and that he was terrible to her, but also because there was a literal paper trail showing the kind of person that he was and what he was capable of. In April of 1987, so 5 years before she disappeared, Martha Martinez had been found on the side of a highway in a terrible state. As soon as she was found, she was rushed to hospital. She was found with duct tape on her mouth, on her wrist, her arms were tied behind her back, and she had an injury from here to here, from ear to ear. And because of that injury, she was so close to losing her life. When she was taken to the hospital, she was rushed into emergency surgery and she survived, luckily. And while in hospital, Martha told investigators that the night before, her and her husband Jeffrey had gotten into a really bad argument, that he had tied her up and essayed her in the worst of the worst way possible. I don't necessarily want to go too much into detail on that, but I will say that there were electric shocks involved. After this, Jeffrey was of course arrested and charged with aggravated kidnapping, and while he was in prison awaiting trial, he wrote Martha several letters apologizing, saying that he was sorry, saying that he didn't mean to, begging her to forgive him. And whatever he was saying to manipulate Martha, it worked, because Martha eventually agreed to stay with him and she stopped cooperating with police altogether. Because of that, when the trial finally came around and Martha was not willing to testify against Jeffrey, the jury was unable to find him guilty, unable to convict him of anything, and the case was dropped. 5 years later, Martha Martinez disappeared, and to this day, she has never been found. She has been missing since 1992. And that brings us to 1995. Jeffrey divorces Martha Martinez, and in what felt like 2 seconds, he reconnected and remarried Rita, his first wife. Yes, he reconnects with Rita. They pick up right where they left off. Jeffrey moves in with Rita, and to no one's surprise, he is awful to her because he is an awful man. The two of them get remarried, but just days before their wedding, Rita's best friend goes to authorities to report SA. She tells them that Jeffrey attempted to SA her, but nothing ever came from that. In her time apart from Jeffrey, had 3 daughters with a different man. After her and Jeffrey remarried, one of those daughters reports to her school that her now stepdad SA'd her, but nothing ever came from that either. In fact, Jeffrey just made the girls switch schools, and at that different school, a different daughter, the youngest daughter, reports to that new school that her stepdad Jeffrey SA'd her. That school thankfully called CPS, and CPS told Rita, either you take your girls, you get up and leave this horrible man, get them out of this horrible home situation that they're in, or we will take the girls from you. And luckily, Rita did. She got up, she took her children, and she left Jeffrey, thankfully, because who is to say what he would have done to them if they had stayed? Fast forward 6 years, now it's 2001, Jeffrey Maxwell is now in his 50s and he moves to a different part of Texas. Parker County, Texas, about 70 miles west of Dallas, and in said neighborhood, he was known to be a weird dude. You would wave at him, you would give him a small smile, forced smile, but you didn't want to get stuck talking to this guy because he just gave off a weird feeling, a feeling of danger. One of his neighbors was Lois Pearson, a lovely woman, but a very reserved, quiet one. The house that Lois lived in was her childhood home. She had lived there her entire life. She was never married, never had kids, and she didn't really have any friends. It was just her, and she lived a very peaceful, quiet life all on her own. She only ever really left the house to either go to work, go to church, or go to the grocery store. But that's it. She was a homebody through and through, and when she started seeing Jeffrey around, she waved at him, she acknowledged him, but then things got weird when Jeffrey asked her on a date. Lois, in her head, was like, no, I really would rather do literally anything else than go on a date with you, but on the outside she was really polite, said thanks but no thanks. But Jeffrey either didn't want to take the hint or did not respect her decision, because for the next 4 years he kept insisting that Lois go on a date with him. 4 years? 4 years is crazy. It does not take 4 years to comprehend. It was no on day 1. It's gonna be no forever, my guy. Then one day, he asks Lois out on a date, and she says, no, it's literally still a no. And he tries to kiss her, and Lois is like, what do you mean? Are you mental? Like, do you have a brain, or what is your problem? She tells him, do not ever come near my house again. You are not welcome here. But then, Jeffrey moves out. He moves to yet a different part of Texas, and once again, 6 years pass until we get to 2011. By this point, Jeffrey has not seen, spoken to, or known anything about Lois, but he was still holding a grudge because 6 years ago she rejected him and he was not going to let that go. March 1st of 2011, it was a Tuesday. Lois was having a regular Tuesday until she got a knock on her door, and she opened the door, and to her surprise, it was her old neighbor, 59-year-old Jeffrey Maxwell. And before she even got a chance to realize what was going on, Jeffrey had pulled out pepper spray and used it on Lois. She tried to make a run for it, but he caught up to her and pushed her back inside the house, where he tied her wrists and her ankles together. Lois was still putting up a fight. And while Jeffrey was distracted looking for duct tape, she managed to get away, and she started making a run for it. She started running down the street, but Jeffrey just got in his car and chased after her, drove after her until he reached her, pulled out a weapon, and managed to force her into the trunk of his vehicle. He then made the 2-hour drive to his house, where Lois would spend the next 12 days being held captive and put through the most inhumane things. Jeffrey Maxwell had a device that he made. He says that he made it for cleaning hogs and deer, to hang them up and clean them thoroughly, but in reality, he only used it to make Lois's life a living nightmare. It basically looked like chains hanging from the ceilings, and he would attach her arms to it, and her feet couldn't touch the floor. And she was left on that for so long that her shoulder dislocated. It came out of the socket. And on the second day, Jeffrey gave her a choice. He said that he had to go out and run some errands, and told her that he could either put her back on that device or he could put her in a wooden box. So she was locked away in this wooden box, only big enough to barely fit her in it. She wasn't allowed to use the bathroom normally. She wasn't allowed to clean herself. She had no idea what day it was, what time it was, or where she was. And if she wasn't on that device or inside of that wooden box, she was chained to a bed. Her hands and feet were tied for days at a time. He kept her blindfolded at times. He withheld food and water from her, and he would tell her repeatedly that no one cared about her and that no one was coming to save her. On the third day, he left her tied to a bed frame all day day, and when he returned, he told her that he had something to show her and showed her a picture of a house up in flames. The house was absolutely and completely destroyed, and Lois didn't want to believe it, but it was her house. It was her childhood home, the house that she shared with her parents when they were still around. The only house that she had ever known and loved her entire life. Jeffrey had gone out and completely destroyed it, and when he was showing her it, he was laughing, which is so evil. And also, I think it goes without saying, I don't even think I have to mention this, but Lois experienced SA almost every single day. Jeffrey didn't even look at her as a human being. He just treated her like an object that he could play with. It's so vile. Now, Jeffrey, because his brain is so small, he forced Lois to write him a check. He used that check and cashed it into his bank account. Well, as we know, Lois Pearson's house was completely destroyed, but when the scene was investigated, they didn't find Lois or any of her remains. So to authorities, she was now a missing person. Well, the bank flagged when a check in the name of Lois Pearson, a missing person, was deposited. They saw that a check in her name was deposited into the account of a Jeffrey Maxwell, and they alerted law enforcement. So the police go to Jeffrey Maxwell's house in March 12th of 2011, and they're like, what is going on here? How are you going to explain this? And in that moment, thankfully, even though she had been told to stay quiet or else, Lois looked out the window and she saw a vehicle parked outside that said sheriff on it, and she realized that the people outside standing at the front door were 2 cops, and she ran out of them and started yelling, I'm here, I'm here. And just like that, Lois Pearson was finally safe. One of the officers that found Lois described that house to be a house of horrors, and he said, quote, there's no doubt in my mind that he was going to. He didn't have any options. If our men showed up a day later, who knows what we would have found, end quote. Jeffrey Maxwell confessed to everything, but even so, he then pled not guilty to charges of aggravated 2 counts of aggravated SA. His trial began in February 14th of 2012. The jury took less than 1 hour to find him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 3 life sentences, meaning that he will not be eligible for parole until he is 119 years old. Lois Pearson was so incredibly brave. She got up there and she testified against him inside of that courtroom. And after trial, she worked so hard to forgive him. She still keeps her very strong faith, and she has said, quote, I don't want to miss out on heaven because of that man. I feel very relieved. It's a miracle that I'm alive, end quote. Since then, Lois has lived such a happy life, which makes me so happy to say. I literally just got goosebumps. But remember, before, she was a very quiet and reserved person. She didn't really have human interaction on most days, but that was because of her choosing. But now she definitely does. She's kind of the opposite. Her church raised money to help buy her a new trailer for her property. The church even gave her a new piano. She goes to church still regularly, and she speaks to her church friends all the time, and she always has people stopping by, checking in on her, bringing her food, being so kind to her, which she deserves. And she has met incredible people, which is amazing. I want to end this video by thinking of and being so happy that Lois Pearson is still here with us to this day. But I also want to end this video by remembering Martha Martinez, who has been missing since 1992 and has never been found, and I can only hope that one day her family gets the justice that they deserve. But that is all I have for today's video, so thank you so much for hanging out with me today and for listening to this story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Go do something that makes you happy. Buy yourself a treat, buy yourself a gift. Call your mom, call your sisters, call a friend that you've been meaning to talk to. I don't know, but go do something to make it the best day. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This might be the most intriguing true crime case for me personally, and one that I think you guys are going to find extremely interesting. If you're not already familiar with the staircase case of Michael and Kathleen Peterson, sit down and relax, or get up and clean your room, because we're going to be here for a while. Michael and Kathleen Peterson are the 2 people that we are going to be discussing today, and they were said to have the perfect marriage. They were soulmates. They lived in this big, beautiful house. They were really living this fairy tale life until December 9th, 2001, around 2:40 a.m., Michael Peterson called 911 to report that he found his wife Kathleen lying at the bottom of their staircase. Michael is absolutely frantic on the 911 call. He's begging them, please get here soon. He's saying that his wife had fallen down the staircase and she was unconscious. Oddly enough, on the 911 call, Michael never mentions the amount of blood that is at the scene, which is the first thing that the first responders noticed when they got there. And tragically, by the time that the first responders did get there, Kathleen was already gone. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it for you guys. The amount of blood that was at this scene, it was an insanely large amount of blood for a woman just simply falling down the staircase. And there is photos online, there's crime scene photos. Typically, I tell you guys not to look at crime scene photos, but if you guys want to, I do think it's important to understand the gravity of the amount of blood that was at this scene. It was said that there was over 10,000 blood splatters on the staircase and on the walls. The police on the scene were really suspicious of Michael immediately for more reasons than one. For one thing, Michael's story of events that night is kind of unbelievable. He says that him and his wife Kathleen sat down and they watched a movie, and the movie ended around 11 p.m. The two of them went outside to share some wine by the pool, and then sometime around midnight or before midnight, Kathleen went inside, and then Michael stayed outside for about 2 or 3 hours alone. But it was December, and it was nighttime, and he was only wearing a t-shirt and shorts, which is, I don't know, kind of weird to be sitting outside for 2 to 3 hours in the cold in just a t-shirt, but I digress. He then says that he went inside around 2:30, 2:40 in the morning, where he found his wife lying at the bottom of the staircase before calling 911. It's an odd timeline for sure, but even more suspicious was the blood. Yes, there was an abnormally large amount of blood at this scene for someone who has just fallen down the stairs. But there was also blood found inside of Michael's shorts that he was wearing. A bloody footprint was also found on Kathleen's sweatpants that matched one of Michael's shoes, but he says that he was barefoot for the entire night. And probably the second most suspicious piece of evidence in this case is after the police did a luminol test. I'm sure you guys know what luminol is, but if you don't, it's a chemical that will show where blood has been, even if someone attempts to clean it up. The test showed that someone tracked bloody footprints throughout the house, into the kitchen, to the sink, to the washing machine, and then attempted to clean it up. And I say that this is only the second most suspicious thing because I'm going to share with you guys the most suspicious thing ever in just a minute. But first, let's talk about Kathleen's autopsy. The autopsy showed that Kathleen had 7 deep lacerations to her head, and the medical examiner said that this was likely caused by being hit over the head repeatedly by an object. Also, there was cartilage in Kathleen's neck that was fractured, likely by strangulation. And with this, Kathleen's cause of death was determined to be a homicide. And if you're not already extremely suspicious of Kathleen's husband, Michael, what if I told you this was not the first time a woman close to Michael was found dead at the bottom of a staircase? Years before Michael and Kathleen met and got married, he was living in Germany with his first wife, and the two of them had a very close friend, a single mother named Elizabeth Ratliff. The last time that Elizabeth was ever seen alive, she had dinner at Michael's house, and then after dinner, Michael walked Elizabeth home. Later that night, Michael was seen by Elizabeth's neighbor running away from Elizabeth's house, and the very next morning, Elizabeth was found dead, lying at the bottom of her staircase, in an eerily similar way to the way that Kathleen was found. Blood everywhere and deep lacerations to the back of her head. And after Elizabeth died, Michael actually adopted Elizabeth's 2 daughters, left his wife, and then took Elizabeth's 2 daughters and moved back to the United States, which is kind of weird. At first, Elizabeth's death was ruled as an accident, and Michael never mentioned this when his wife was found dead the exact same way. I'm assuming since it happened in Germany, in another country, he was hoping that no one would ever find out. It actually wasn't until Elizabeth's sister heard the news that Michael's wife died the exact same way that her sister did, and he was the last one to see both of them alive. So she alerted the authorities, and they actually exhumed Elizabeth's body to do an autopsy, and it was determined that Elizabeth's cause of death was not an accident. It was actually a homicide. So things are not looking good for Michael Peterson, and he was arrested for the murder of his wife, Kathleen. During the trial, the defense's story was that Kathleen had fallen while walking up the stairs, but then she fell back, hit her head, she tried to get up, slipped on her own blood, so she fell backwards again, she tried to get up, then she fell again, and she did that until she had the 7 head wounds. It sounds far-fetched, especially since if you fall walking up the stairs, your instinct is to fall forward and catch yourself. But they say that this is possible because Kathleen was drunk, that they were sharing wine that night. But Kathleen actually had so little alcohol in her system that she would have passed a breathalyzer test and would have still been able to legally drive. And I'm sure you're wondering if there's a motive here. Why would Michael want to kill his wife, his soulmate? The prosecution actually had 2 possible motives. the one being financial. Michael and Kathleen were in debt, a lot of debt actually, upwards of $140,000 in debt. And Kathleen had a life insurance policy of nearly $2 million. But there's also another possible motive. Michael was having an affair with a man, actually. On Michael's computer, he had over 2,000 images of men. He had also been speaking online to a young male escort for about 4 months before Kathleen died, with plans of meeting up in person to pay for this escort's services. And the night that Kathleen died, she used Michael's computer, which she never did, but she had some work to do and she accidentally left her computer at the office. The prosecution's theory was that Kathleen found this, she confronted her husband, and Michael snapped. He was known to have a quick temper, and since he possibly had gotten away with murder once before, he would know exactly what to do. The prosecution even had a potential murder weapon. Well, kind of. Kathleen's injuries to her head lined up with a fireplace blow poke, and Kathleen and Michael did have a custom-made, a really nice blow poke that they had gotten from a gift from Kathleen's sister. And the night that Kathleen died, the blow poke was missing, nowhere to be found. Ultimately, the jury did find Michael Peterson guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but this case does not end here. Michael has never been charged in the death of Elizabeth Ratliff, and her 2 daughters have stuck by their adoptive father Michael and have believed in his innocence to this day. And Michael, to this day, has maintained his innocence, and he spent 8 years in prison for killing his wife until it was determined that Michael did not get a fair trial and a judge awarded Michael a brand new trial. But instead of doing the entire trial again, Michael was given a plea deal, an Alford plea, which we've talked about Alford pleas before. It's a super rare kind of plea deal where you can plead guilty to something while still maintaining your innocence. And that's what Michael did. And then after taking this plea deal, Michael was released on time served. So today, Michael Peterson is a free man. This case is extremely controversial. There's a lot of people out there that think Michael Peterson got away with killing 2 women. But there's a lot of people out there that also think that Michael Peterson was innocent. There's also a lot of people out there that believe in the owl theory. Yes, there is a theory that an owl killed Kathleen Peterson. It seems far-fetched, but it's an interesting theory and there is some evidence that backs it up. The theory is that while Kathleen was still outside but walking to her home, an owl dive-bombed her, attacked her head, which is, I guess, something that owls do. I'm no owl expert, but apparently the injuries on Kathleen's head are similar to an owl's talon marks. And to escape this owl, Kathleen just ran into her home. She's not paying attention, and that's how she fell down the stairs. When Kathleen was found, inside of her hand was a clump of her own hair. There were also pine needles and some owl feathers, which would make sense. If an owl was attacking your head, you would just be pulling and grabbing to try and get it off. It's an interesting theory, and you guys are gonna have to tell me what you think. Personally, my gut just tells me that Michael is guilty. I just can't get over the fact that someone tried to clean up bloody footprints in the house, and also this happened to another woman in Michael's past. And he was also seen running from her house the day that it happened. Today, Michael Peterson is a free man, and this case remains a mystery. I'm really looking forward to get all your guys' take on this case. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting conversation in the comments. You guys are always coming up with theories I would never put together in my head, so definitely leave all your thoughts, theories, questions in the comment section. And while you're there, let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
She sat on this computer chatting to an online predator who's about to abduct her. It was January 2002 in Pittsburgh. If you're old enough like me to remember the early days of the internet, we had no idea how dangerous things could get. It was actually magical back then. Like, what do you mean I can talk to anybody from anywhere in the world? Alicia Kozak was doing just that. She was a really sweet 13-year-old girl, beautiful, kind, and a very pure and innocent soul. And she's a teenage girl at this point. A teenage guy starts talking to her and she's flattered and she's really appreciative of the friendship. She really did believe that he was the same age as her. I mean, why would somebody lie? So this went on for months and months. They developed this relationship. She believed that she was talking to another teenage boy, but things were about to take a very, very dark turn. Now, New Year's Day, there was this big celebration at Alicia's house with all of her family, and she thought to herself, what harm could it do to just quickly pop outside, nobody will even know that I was gone, and just say hello to this online friend in real life? She innocently thought she would literally be back in a few minutes. So she said to her mum, I've got a bit of a poorly tummy, can I just be excused for a second and just go to my room? So her mum obviously said yes. Instead, Alicia snuck out the door right into a predator's trap. So she snuck to the end of the road and she was like, that's really weird. I can't see anybody here. We were meant to meet. There was absolutely nobody around, but it was really, really cold and very eerie. The next thing she knew, she was bundled into a car. And in the chaos, she was like, oh my God, what the hell is going on? Where am I? All she could see in this vehicle were handcuffs and ropes. Inside of the car with her was a 38-year-old man, Scott Tyree. And it didn't even dawn on her at first that this was the person who was pretending to be her friend online. He drove and drove and drove, and she was just begging, praying that somebody was going to be able to spot her and rescue her, but no luck. And this went on for 5 hours. Imagine being kidnapped and literally not knowing where the hell that person is taking you for 5 hours. And the horror wasn't over at the end of the drive. When he finally made it to Virginia, he then bundled her down into a pitch black locked basement. Now, he actually knew she was terrified of the dark from the conversations that they'd had, and he was literally using this against her. He then stripped her off and AR'd her, but it wouldn't be the last time. Alicia endured days and days of sickening, relentless abuse. And it gets even worse than it already sounds, because he wasn't just doing this for his own sick gratification. There were others who wanted to watch. He beat her, AR'd her, broke her nose, all on camera on a live stream. But Alicia was smart, and she knew, if I want to survive this, if I actually want to get out of here, it's no use just fighting against him because he's a grown man. She was like, I need to be clever about this, and I need to try and get him attached to me, because then it would make it even more hard for him to actually kill me. And it actually worked. He even admitted to her, I'm starting to like you too much. So suddenly, on the 4th day, when he'd actually gone out to work and left her down there, she heard a massive crash. She was startled. She was like, oh my God, who is that? She could kind of hear shouting, somebody saying that they had a weapon, and she just genuinely thought, these people have come to kill me. It was the police, though. They'd come to rescue her. She had no idea, and in her terrified state, she actually crawled under the bed. She didn't want to be found. She was convinced, bless her, these are more people that are going to do me harm. I need to hide. She was shaking as she saw these feet coming closer and closer to the bed she was hiding under. She braced herself. She thought, this is the moment when I die. They shouted, crawl up and put your hands on your head, which she did, but to her surprise, they cut her chains off and rescued her. Now, it turns out that some sick person who was actually watching the live stream decided that they wanted to do the right thing and report this to the police because they recognized the girl's face from like missing posters. So I guess even bad people can do good things sometimes. The FBI were thankfully able to track that IP address and race over to Scott's property. About half an hour later, they managed to track Scott down himself as well at work. I think one of the parts of this case that shocked me the most, I don't know about you guys, is the fact that Scott had a daughter who was virtually the same age as Alicia. In 2003, Scott was given 19 years and 7 months in prison, but surprise, surprise, did not serve his whole sentence. He was released in 2019, but again, surprise, surprise, he actually was sent back later after violating parole. He was released again in 2021. Alicia now has a master's degree in forensic psychology and has dedicated her life to being an advocate for online safety and a motivational speaker.
I'll never be able to understand how this young girl went missing from her bedroom only for her body to be discovered 9 days later in her bed. This is one of Mexico's most controversial cases, because was this an accidental death or a murder that had been covered up? I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the suspicious death of Paulette Ibarra. Paulette was the second-born daughter from her parents, Mauricio and Lizette. When she was born in 2005, she was very premature and severely underweight, and because of this, the doctors didn't think that she would be able to pull through. But Paulette was strong and she was a fighter, and she did. She managed to pull through. She had both developmental and physical disabilities. For her, this meant that she wasn't able to walk or move around herself, and she also couldn't speak. She could spit out a couple of words here and there, but she couldn't really string a sentence together or communicate. Because of Paulette's additional needs, her parents employed 2 nannies to help them with the care of the girls. The Ibarra family were a relatively well-off family. Mauricio worked in real estate and Lizette was actually a very powerful lawyer. So because they both had really good jobs, they were able to live quite a lavish lifestyle. They lived in a huge apartment in a very expensive complex. They were able to go on holidays, and all round they just lived a very happy, comfortable comfortable lifestyle. In March 2010, Mauricio and his 2 daughters went away on a little weekend trip. Lizette didn't go with them because she went away on her own weekend trip, and it later came out that she had went to meet another man. She was having an affair. So the happy marriage between Mauricio and Lizette wasn't as happy as it seemed. When everyone returned home on the evening of the 21st of March, Lizette put both of her daughters to bed, kissing Paulette on the forehead before tucking her into bed and wishing her a good night. The next morning, after waving off the older daughter to school, one of the nannies went to Paulette's bedroom to wake her up and get her sorted for nursery. However, when she went in the bedroom, Paulette was nowhere to be seen. Both of the nannies searched all around Paulette's bedroom. They looked under her bed and in her closet. They then moved to looking all around the apartment, including in Mauricio's and Lizette's bedroom, but to no avail. Paulette was gone and they couldn't find her. When the nannies told the parents about Paulette's disappearance, they were described as being unbothered, and while the nannies continued their search within the building, speaking to security and scouring through the halls, the parents did nothing. When the police were eventually notified of Paulette's disappearance, this was the beginning of one of the biggest cases in Mexico. An investigative and forensics team showed up at the apartment and began 5 searches on that day with the help of sniffer dogs, but they were unable to find anything. CCTV footage from the building was reviewed and it didn't show Paulette leaving, and it didn't look like anyone had taken her. They weren't on the ground floor of the apartment building, and so it was very unlikely that Paulette went out the window, especially because, again, she couldn't walk and she couldn't really move around herself, and it was also unlikely that someone climbed into their window to kidnap her. There was no signs of forced entry, no sign of a struggle, and both of the parents said that on that evening their dog did not bark once, and if someone had came into their home and taken Paulette, the dog would have alerted them. Flyers and billboards of Paulette were plastered all over Mexico. They were desperate to find her, and everyone knew her name and knew her face. 5 days after the disappearance, Lizette went onto the TV and began pleading for Paulette to be brought home, speaking to anyone out there who may know where she is or know an abductor to please bring her back. This interview was being conducted inside of Paulette's room. Lizette and the reporter both sat on Paulette's bed, which had already been slept in by her family members since her disappearance. The bed sheets had also been changed by the nannies. On day 9 of her disappearance, investigators were stood inside of Paulette's bedroom. By this time, over 100 people had been in and out of the bedroom, and so far no one had discovered anything. However, on this day, as the investigators are stood, they started to get a whiff of the very thick, distinct smell of death. They would go on to discover the body of 4-year-old Paulette, and suspiciously, only the night before, that apartment building had some sort of fault with the electrics, meaning that everyone's electric went off and the entire building was in complete darkness for a period of time. She was discovered covered up in blankets and stuffed at the foot of her bed, partially under her mattress and squashed against the bed frame. One of the men who found her would comment saying that she looked like she had been beaten. I won't be able to include a full picture of how she was found on this video because of this app, but if you go ahead and Google it, you will be able to see full photos of how she was found, and it just absolutely blows my mind how she was like this that entire time apparently, but no one found her. Just cannot grasp how she was missed so many times. It is genuinely infuriating. How did over 100 people, including trained investigators and sniffer dogs, miss her? How did the nannies not discover her as they changed their bed sheets? How did the family not know that she was there when they were sleeping in that bed? And how did no one of the over 100 people who came into the bedroom smell the decomposition? That is, if she was actually there the entire time. Yet the day after the lights were out in the building, the investigators started to smell it. Paulette's cause of death would go on to be ruled as accidental. It was theorised that she had rolled over in her sleep and became lodged at the foot of her bed between the bed frame and the mattress and suffocated to death. Her cause of death would be ruled as asphyxiation that obstructed the respiratory airways and compressed the abdominal thorax. There were no signs of abuse or neglect, there were no drugs in her system, and no sign that her body had been moved post-mortem, meaning that with this evidence, she had been at the foot of her bed the entire time. She was there when on that first day the forensics team and the sniffer dog searched that entire apartment 5 times. She was there as over 100 people came in and out of that room, and she was there as Lizette was sat on her bed with a reporter giving an interview to the media. Even though obviously I trust the evidence, I just don't understand. I find that incredibly hard to believe. There were actually so many theories surrounding this case because so many other people just cannot believe it. Some people believe that she was murdered, and there was an array of different reasons. Some of them were due to Mauricio's and Lizette's failing marriage, all the way to Lizette growing tired of all the additional care that Paulette needed. She was allegedly quoted saying, "Even if I lose Paulette, I still have another daughter. And oh well, who knows what happened to little Paulette? Maybe the aliens took her, or Harry Potter." The parents didn't initially aid in the search for Paulette, and they were described as being unbothered. And if your disabled younger daughter went missing, wouldn't the first place that you would thoroughly search be the place that she went missing from, the bed? Wouldn't you flip the bed, lift up the mattress? If they lifted up the mattress, they would have found her. Other people think that maybe Paulette's death had something to do with Lizette's affair. That is just a handful of the many theories surrounding this case. Comment down below and let me know what you think. Was this a murder that's been covered up, or was this a horrifying accidental death?
This is the story of Michael and Heather Jones. Major trigger warning right here. This story is about the cruel abuse of a child. So I'll get it if you got to keep scrolling. Late 2011, Kansas City, Kansas. Adrian, who was then 3 years old, and his 3 sisters are being taken away from their biological mother after several reports of her drug use and leaving the children unattended. During the custody battle, Adrian's older sister went to go live with a family member of her choice. But Adrian's grandmother fought tooth and nail for custody of the younger 3. But the judge granted custody to their father, Michael Jones. Almost immediately after moving in with his father and his stepmother, DCF, which is Department of Children and Families, started receiving anonymous hotline tips about the way Adrian was being treated in the home. It later came out that those phone calls were coming from babysitters of the children. They said that Adrian's punishments were excessive. In February of 2012, a Kansas child welfare worker went to physically go see Adrian, but determined that there was no signs of abuse. But with all this heat on them, this caused the family to move to Missouri. July 2013, about a year and some change later, Adrian, who is now 5, is being interviewed by a Missouri caseworker with a police present, and he directly tells them, "My daddy kicks me. My daddy keeps hitting me." This interview with Adrian didn't stem from Kansas City. Michael and Heather were still getting calls in Missouri, just like they were in Kansas City, about the abuse of Adrian. About a month later, on August 9th, the family is fully moved back to Kansas City, but a caseworker in Missouri contacted Kansas City to warn them that it is abuse in the household. But nothing is ever done. Early 2014, Adrian is placed in a residential treatment facility, but not because he's in danger, but because he's struggling to survive emotionally. Later that year in September, after all the documented of alleged abuse he was enduring, he was placed back with his father and Heather. Adrian's grandmother, Judy Conway, said that Christmas of 2014 was the last Christmas she was allowed to see Adrian. She had contacted DCF twice over the safety of him, but nothing ever happened. The day before Thanksgiving 2015, 29-year-old Heather called the police on her 44-year-old husband, Michael Jones. She stated that Michael pulled a gun out on her after she was leaving and taking the kids. She said he shot her and the bullet grazed her ear. When the police arrived and put Michael in handcuffs, Heather also told them, "If you look around our property, you will find the remains of a 7-year-old boy who's been missing for 2 months." The police came back the next day on Thanksgiving Day with a search warrant and found the remains of 7-year-old Adrian Jones in a pig pen. Yes, 7-year-old Adrian was fed to pigs. On December 4th of 2015, Heather did an interview with the news saying that she was out of town during the time of Adrian's death, but she could see it happening through surveillance that they had all through the house. She said that he died from the injuries sustained from his father, but during this interview, Heather is fighting for her life to get a tear out.
Mike knocked out my 2 front teeth. when I tried to stop him from hurting Adrian. I told him that was enough. And that was probably one of the worst times that he had ever hurt me.
I didn't see not a nair tear. The house that Michael and Heather were renting was owned by a lady named Jennifer. She did an interview with the news showing the inside of the house while the two were incarcerated. I forgot to mention that Michael and Heather went on to have 4 additional children, just them, on top of Michael's other children. So it was 7 children living in the house, and Adrian was the only boy. The house was a mess. I can't even believe a family was living here. It was dead mice everywhere. It was trash everywhere. Bags of syringes, pornography just laid out in the house with 7 children. To see all these photos and videos, go to Daily Mail. I can't post all this on here, but you won't believe the stuff that was in this house. About 6 months after their arrest in July of 2016, Heather contacted the homeowner, asking her to log into her iCloud so she can get pictures of her children. And when Jennifer logged into Heather's iCloud, Lord, what she seen. She found a file with videos and photos labeled "The Boy," with abuse spanning over 8 months. This photo right here is Adrian being forced to stand in a dirty pool with water up to his neck for hours. Now, the property had like 30 or more cameras, so they documented every single thing. Adrian was forced to stand with his hands in the air for hours on end, outside during any weather. If his hands weren't up, they were handcuffed behind his back, along with his feet being shackled. I watched a video of him with his hands and feet tied while outside, walking around looking for food. He was literally eating stuff off the ground. That broke me right there. Heather sent a Facebook message to somebody saying that I just strapped the boy to the inversion table. I love y'all. Good night. Apparently, they will strap him to this table for hours on end. It was so bad till I seen a picture of his ankles afterwards and how swollen they were. This is where Adrian spent the last few months of his life, strapped to a chair in this shower, boarded up so he wouldn't escape. I seen a photo of his mouth where he had splinters and it was bleeding because he was trying to chew through the wood. As you can see, Heather is taking selfies in front of this and posting it on Facebook. She will frequently post in this group about what she wanted to do to Adrian. She boldly said that she wanted to shoot him in the back of the head. In one post, she said, well, I can't shoot him, but I can work him to death. Man, what? This is how small Adrian had gotten. I watched a surveillance video of him sneaking out to get a bowl of water, and somebody else came into frame and he hid and snuck back into the bathtub, which was his room. There's no clear date of when Adrian died. They're saying between September or October of 2015. But when he died, his father, Michael Jones, went out to purchase some pigs. Now, Adrian's body was left in that tub for 2 weeks until his father bought the pigs. And when his father bought the pigs, he still didn't feed the pigs for a good amount of time because he wanted the pigs to be hungry. That's when he threw his 7-year-old son out there in the pen. Both Michael and Heather pled guilty and was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. This case was hard. You really have to be strong to watch those videos and to look at those photos. And I still didn't even go through everything. They did so much to him, and the system failed him tremendously. They should have just gave him to his grandmother. Shit like this pisses me off, Yellow Tape.
Ozzy Osbourne has died at age 76. Born John Michael Osbourne in December of 1948 in Birmingham, Ozzy Osbourne dropped out of school when he was 15 years old and would go on to become one of the biggest, most iconic musicians within the rock scene. Many people are familiar with Ozzy after during one of his live performances he bit the head off of a live bat, and since then he was dubbed the Prince of Darkness. Alongside his musical career, he was also at the centre of a reality TV show, The Osbournes, which essentially followed around the Osbourne family, giving us many iconic scenes. Ozzy was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2019, and just a couple of weeks ago, on the 5th of July, he did his final performances, which fans described as, quote, the greatest heavy metal show ever. This morning, Tuesday the 22nd of July 2025, Ozzy Osbourne died while surrounded by his family. A statement that was released by the family reads, quote, it is with more sadness than mere words can convey that we have to report that our beloved Ozzy Osbourne has passed away this morning. He was with his family and surrounded by love.